The Sentinel situation just got a whole lot more interesting, and yes, we're gonna be talking a bit about Marved and not just what he did on the server this past weekend for Sentinels, but the implications his role can have on the team, because while he played great, him being involved with the team actually makes things a little bit more complicated than you think for Sentinels. This past weekend, Sentinels competed in the VCT Americas Super Week. That meant they had to take on two teams over the course of the weekend, with the Brazilian super team Loud being their first opponent on Friday and the other Brazilian team in MIBR on Sunday. Sorry MIBR fans, I called them the other Brazilian team, but come on, you understand. Here's the thing. Sentinels played the best they ever have so far in VCT Americas. Going into the week, the team made radical changes that would for sure shake up the way they were going to play, for better or worse. First, they dropped their head coach Psycho a few days ago and bumped up assistant coach Kaplan to that head coach position. Next, they decided to give their star entry player Tens a break as he was dealing with a finger injury and tested positive for COVID. In his place, Sentinels subbed in their sixth man, which would be the return of the international champion, the iciest man on the server, Marved, back into pro play. Like I said before, Sentinels played their best Valorant of the year so far over this last weekend. Versus Loud, they gave them a serious run for their money. They dominated them on Pearl in 13-6 fashion, went the distance on Haven to lose 13-11, and then eventually got outclassed on Ascent to lose the series 2-1. Despite the loss, it was still a seriously impressive match coming out from Sentinels. Then, over on Sunday, they showed everybody that they weren't messing around with a dominant win over MIBR, going 13-5 and 13-6 on Pearl and Fracture respectively. So what led to the success this week for Sentinels? Well, obviously, we gotta talk about Marved. Anyone who's been following Valorant over the last 2 years knows that he's a superstar player and arguably the best controller player of 2022. So when he announced last year that he wouldn't be playing VCT, but instead taking a prolonged break from the game, Valorant fans were eager for his return to the pro stage. And boy, he did not disappoint. With an impact rating of 1.24 and an ACS of 249, it's safe to say there wasn't much rust to shake off. In fact, with his 2 matches over the weekend, he has now jumped to 2nd place in the league stats-wise, with the only player above him being Aspas. Yeah, he's that good. And yeah, I know it was only a 2-game sample size, but regardless, it was impressive. And those numbers weren't surprising when watching his gameplay. His aim was simply on point. He was popping heads like he never took a break. His most impactful plays were on his attack side lurks. Marved is a great lurker, and his aim in those 50-50 duels on the lurk were doing so much for Sentinels. He always seemed to have a great read on the map, and when there was an important fight to be had, it felt like he was always winning it. Especially in that MIBR game, he won so many fights that got them into a 5v4 situation, which Sentinels was able to convert in a round win almost 100% of the time. Their 5v4 conversion in that match was honestly unbelievable, and Marv definitely played a part in that for Sentinels. But more importantly than just his solo performance on the team, I think, was how he actually made the other players on the team better by fixing their role issues. If you've been keeping up with the Sen games, it's been pretty obvious that the roles on the team have been a factor in their poor performances. This team has Pankata, a world-class smokes player, basically playing full-time Killjoy at this point, and for the most part, he has been holding his own. But the same can't be said for Saucy. He, also like Pankata, was a world-class initiator player last year, but has been relegated to that smoke role since the start of VCT Americas, and he has been really struggling in that smokes role, especially in his Viper games. At times, he looked like a liability for the team, which is a crazy statement for a player like Saucy, but he just hasn't been able to find the adaptation in the gameplay to fit that smokes role. But with Marved introduced to the team, he was able to get back onto that initiator role, and he didn't skip a beat on the Sova.
Well, Pankata opens himself up a little bit too wide here, dropping down. The Hell play is dealt with. Seeing the dart lighten them all up, but Sassy, what more can he find? 1 kill down. Finds a second, left alone. It's a 1v2. Oh my goodness! And he knows where Aspas is! Unbelievable!
He looked like himself again. Utility on point, aim on point, and his confidence was back, and it was beautiful. And let's also talk about my boy Zekken. This year he was put onto the flex role for the team, meaning some maps he was on the Raze, some Sova, some Breach, and for the most part, excluding Lock-in Brazil, he definitely carried his weight on the team. In a lot of their losses, he was typically their best performer and often looked like the best player on the team. But over this weekend, he was put on full-time entry role, a role he had made a name for himself last year playing for XSET. So now back on that entry role, playing the Raze and Jet, the question was, did he still have that dog in him?
She was close, but a lockdown for a lockdown with 19 seconds left. Looks like an attempt here to try and take the fight early, deny the plans, and he does just Zekken! That's a beastly performance.
Yes he did. He looked great on the Raze and Jet. His Raze was really never a question, but it had been a while since he played a pro Jet game and he came to play. His first duel win percentage on the entry was 61%, which is a pretty damn good entry success rate. His movement looked really good and crisp as it usually does, and he played with a lot of confidence on his re-entry onto the role. And is it just me, or did he also feel like a little more consistent with the op than TenZ in his games over the weekend? Now we all know TenZ is an insane opper and has some of the most iconic clips in VCT, but as of late he hasn't been as on point, and to me Zekken looked a little better with the op in his hands. He seemed to more often be in the right place with the op, while TenZ was forced to retake a lot with the op in his games with not that much success. And the great thing about Zekken too is that he has demonstrated that he can play the Jet, Raze, and even Neon to a high level, where some teams are struggling right now because their entry player can only play the Jet to a high level. I'm talking about 100 Thieves or Cryo, and even Sentinels before with TenZ. Now so far, I've been saying pretty much only good things about the team and their performance over this past weekend. So why did I mention that there still might be complications for Sentinels moving forward? Well, here's the thing. As far as we know, TenZ is supposed to come back next week. He was out this week due to injury, and that's the reason they brought in Marv to begin with. But if he rejoins the team next week, that can seriously screw things over, and it's not necessarily because he's a bad player. Here's how I see it. If TenZ rejoins and Marved is out, then we're back to square one. Zekken is most likely on the flex role, Sassy on smokes, and TenZ back on entry. And we've now seen that that isn't necessarily a winning formula. Another option possibly is TenZ back on entry, Marved stays on the smokes, Sassy stays on initiator, and then we would have to bench Zekken. This seems unlikely to me, as Zekken is often one of their best players and in my opinion is honestly too good to bench. A third option could be TenZ back on entry, Marved on smokes, Zekken flex, and Def is kicked to the bench. Now this one is a fan favorite of Reddit Andes who hate Def and think he's a bad IGL. But the problem with this is if Def is benched, then there is no IGL. None of these players have any IGLing experience at the highest level. Some people say that Sassy can take over the IGLing role, but I'm not really sure about that. Remember, in all his time at Loud when they were competing at the highest level, he was always under Sadhak as his IGL and only needed to play his role as an initiator. So I'm not convinced he would be an upgrade over Def in terms of IGLing ability. So what would Sentinels do with the lineup? Well, the way I would go about it if I was in charge of this roster is a fourth possible option. We keep everybody on the same roles as this past weekend, but sub between TenZ and Zekken between maps depending if you need a Jet or a Raze. We put TenZ on the Jet maps and Zekken on the Raze maps. This, in my opinion, utilizes the 6-man roster to the best of their abilities and keeps the roles comfortable. The thing is, there is technically a fifth option that might be better and I didn't mention before because it's hard for me to imagine that this could actually happen. And it's simple. We keep the exact same lineup as last week and keep TenZ benched. Ooh, could you imagine the buzz that this would blow up on Twitter if this actually happened? The TenZ enjoyers would be making noise and the TenZ haters would also be making noise. But honestly, this could work. We don't necessarily need TenZ back. Zekken has shown that he can play Jet and hang with the best, and he also covers the Raze role. He's probably just the better entry player straight up. But TenZ is their star player, right? He's the one with the largest following and the biggest draw for viewers and Sentinels content. So would Sentinels actually keep him bench if they think it's the best for the team? It's hard to say and we'll have to see what they do. But the thing is, most of these options assume Marved will stay on the starting lineup. But is that going to be the case? He's technically their 6th man and only did sub in this week because Tens was sick and injured, but seeing the way he played, it would be crazy for Sentinels to not utilize him moving forward. He was an absolute monster in both games, and with more practice would only get better, we could imagine. But does Marved even want to be a starter? He did say he wanted to take time off VCT this year and that he also really didn't want to move to LA for VCT Americas. If he was to start, he would need to move to LA, and I'm not sure he's ready or wanting to do that right now. Joining this roster, I'm not even sure Marved actually thought he would need to play official games this year. He probably just wanted a nice streamer salary with the off chance he gets to play a real pro game. So is he ready to jump back in full time? Well, his post-game interview may have shed a little bit of light on exactly that.
And Marved, with this opportunity to be able to see you play on the big stage, I want to give one last chance for you to say something to all the fans who have been rooting for you.
I appreciate you guys, and shout out to the ones who actually believed in me and didn't think I was washed. So I appreciate you guys.
Oh yeah.
I'm not washed, and yeah, I'm here to stay.
Awesome.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Marved, and congratulations
Oh,
once
what?
again to the
Wait, what is that
Sentinels
supposed to
for
mean?
taking home a second
what is that supposed to
victory
mean?
in the Americas League. Let's head back to the desk.
Well, you heard him. He said he's here to stay. Did he really mean that, or was it just something cool to say in the moment? Well, I for one think it's pretty likely he stays on the roster. Why? Well, Sentinels have 4 more matches in the season and they're all very winnable if they keep playing like they did this past weekend or improve even more. And here's what we're not accounting for. The Rob Moore factor. Rob Moore is the CEO of Sentinels, and he was most likely the one in charge of previous head coach Psycho being removed abruptly, considering it was announced on his own personal Twitter account, which is pretty unusual to begin with. It was obvious Psycho's removal was results based, and Sen just had their best results and gameplay over the past weekend with Marved on the starting roster. So I think it's quite possible that Rob Moore will demand that Marv stays in the roster moving forward, despite what anyone else on the team wants to do. So yeah, this past weekend, Marved did definitely have a big impact on Sentinel's results. But you know what I think didn't? Sen abruptly removing their head coach Psycho, like I previously mentioned. I mean, moving your coach only 3 games into the season is wild, and definitely sets a bad precedent for Sentinels moving forward. If you're interested in the whole Sentinels coaching situation and how we got to this place, I made a whole video covering the situation that I will have linked in the top left corner of your screen. Be sure to check it out.